So the next organ of special sense is the ear. The ear is the special sense organ that senses hearing and equilibrium. So there are two different receptors for hearing and equilibrium. So they are housed in the same structure, but they respond to different stimuli differently, and they're activated independently of each other. So these receptors for hearing and equilibrium are called mechanoreceptors because they respond to physical forces. Now, the anatomy of the ear is divided into three different areas: the external ear, middle ear, and the internal ear. The external ear consists of the auricle, known as the pinna, and it has the auditory canal, also known as the external acoustic meatus, and then it has the tympanic membrane. Now the tympanic membrane is a really thin membrane that responds to hearing. Auricle acts like a funnel, so it funnels the noise inward to be transferred into the ear. Now the external acoustic meatus is a narrow chamber which is right by the temporal bone, and it is lined with skin and ceruminous glands. So ceruminous glands are special sweat glands that secrete ear wax for protection of the ear. The end of the tympanic, the end of the eardrum, the end of the auditory canal, there is the tympanic membrane, which is involved in collecting and responding to the sound waves. Now, the middle ear is a cavity which is filled with mucosa, that is mucus fluids, and it is filled with air and only involved in sensing. It's located between the tympanic membrane and the oval window between the inner ear and the external ear. So the middle ear cavity contains receptors or the bones that actually respond to the vibrations that the tympanic membrane receives, and the middle ear contains three bones that span the cavity of the bone. We call it the malleus, the incus, and the hammer, also known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup or stapes. Now these three basically transmit vibrations from the tympanic membrane to the inner ear. So when the tympanic membrane receives the vibrations from the external ear, it vibrates and it hits these bones, and these bones in turn transfer the vibrations to each other, and finally to the oval window of the inner ear, where there are fluids that respond to the vibration. The inner ear consists of the other organs that help in hearing and balance. So this includes the organs for sensing voices externally, and it also includes receptors for balance. So it has a bony labyrinth which consists of the cochlea, it consists of the vestibule, and the semicircular canals that you're seeing over here. So these are the semicircular canals. And these semicircular canals are filled with a fluid known as perilymph and endolymph. And these sensors basically obtain the vibrations from the three bones, and when the vibration hit the inner bone, the sensors pick it up, and that's how we can actually, receive auditory signals. And the other type of receptors over here are also meant for balance. So right over here, the fluid is filled in the semicircular canal and the cochlea and the vestibule. So this area over here contains receptors, and right over here you have receptors as well. So macula is a special area right in this region over here in the vestibule, which is responsible for static equilibrium. So static equilibrium is a kind of equilibrium that we use to figure out which way is up. So to figure out gravity. So when you're doing, say, yoga and your head is upside down, the macula, which is a specialized mechanoreceptor right in here, tells you which side is up, and it helps in maintaining balance while you do yoga. Now the other type of equilibrium is dynamic equilibrium. So dynamic equilibrium interprets balance when we are in motion. For example, riding in a car or turning one's head from side to side, we need to maintain balance as well. So the semicircular canal contains receptors for detecting dynamic equilibrium. So right inside the cochlea, there's a spiral organ known as corti, and they contain receptors which are hair-like membranous basilar membranous structures, which are capable of bending. So the gel-like membrane is capable of bending the hair cells, and the cochlear nerve attached to the hair cell transmits the nerve impulses to the auditory cortex, which is located on the temporal lobe. So high-pitched sounds disturb the short and stiff fibers of the basilar membrane, but there are other types of fibers which are floppy fibers, which are not as stiff, and those type of fibers in the ears, specifically the cochlea, detect low-pitched sounds and vibrate for a longer time. So this picture over here shows the route of sound waves through the ear. You can see the pinna, or the outer ear, channels the noise through the auditory canal, which then hits the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. Now when the eardrum vibrates, it hits the first bone of the ear, which is the hammer, which hits the anvil and then the stirrup bone in turn. So they hit each other. So it's a ripple effect, and eventually it reaches the oval window. When the fluid in the inner ear responds to the vibrations in the ear, the receptors pick up the signal and detect the external noise. Now, deafness itself is defined as the loss of hearing of any degree. So the cause of deafness can vary. It can be due to fusion of the ossicles, known as otosclerosis, or it can be due to a ruptured eardrum, either due to an infection like a bacterial infection, or otitis media, or infection of which is the infection of the inner ear. A very serious pathology associated with hearing loss is Meniere's syndrome, and we don't really know what exactly causes this, but it is the progressive degeneration of the cranial nerve 8, which is responsible for hearing. And a person with this defect has very obvious deafness eventually, but it's progressive. So it goes from a little bit deafness to a lot of deafness. Now, a person with this syndrome has such obvious problems that they even have difficulty standing without discomfort. So the inner fluids gets disturbed as well, so which leads to ringing of the ears or vertigo in the person who's infected with Meniere's.